He was laying in the street, laying on a mat. It was really just a thick blanket that no one wanted in their house anymore. He wasn't strong enough anymore to even sit up to beg, so he had to lay down. So with each footstep that passed him by, usually neglecting to give him any money, the dust of the street was kicked into his face. He'd been paralyzed. We don't know exactly for how long, but it was something that was debilitating and had completely ostracized him from a vibrant and abundant life. But he still had friends. He had friends probably from the time when he was a little boy, and they'd all ran through the marketplace playing games together, and they dreamed about the kind of livelihoods they would make and the kind of families they would have. And for whatever reason, his dream was interrupted. And he laid there constantly wondering what he had done to offend God. What had he done for this physical ailment to be visited upon him? Had his parents done something that offended God? Because to have that kind of physical challenge meant that you had sinned, or that somebody ahead of you in the family lineage had sinned and you were paying the price for it. His days blurred together. Perhaps somebody in the early morning, the coolness of the morning on their way to work, would stop by and get him and help move him to the outskirts of the street so that he could beg, so he could provide something. And then at the end of the day would maybe return him home. Maybe he had a family, maybe he didn't. But one day something interrupted the monotony of his suffering. And it was a group of his friends. And they said, Jesus is home. Jesus is home. Let's go see Jesus. He has been healing people far worse off than you. He will heal you. We know he will heal you. And as Mark's gospel tells us, Jesus is there. He comes home. He's in the house. He's probably kicked back with an icy beverage, or as icy as first century Mediterranean culture could get. And he's chilling out maybe with some flatbread and a little olive oil with some dipping seasonings in it, right? Maybe? Probably not. I don't know that Jesus ever relaxed until it was time to really shut down and recharge. But he was home. Whatever that meant for him, that was his space. And he was probably just taking a deep breath and preparing himself to go back out again. And then there's a knock at the door, and whoever's in that space with him says, Jesus, there's someone at the door. And Jesus says, who's at the door? And the person says, everybody. Everybody's at the door, Jesus. They heard you're home, and so everybody's here. So they open the door, and everyone comes in, or at least as many as will fit in the place where Jesus is at, that is being called home. And so what does he do? Does he say, I'm sorry, I do not have enough bread and oil for all of you. You need to go until I finish my snack. No, he doesn't say that. He also doesn't perform a miracle and make enough snack for everybody, does he? No. He starts to lovingly teach them about who God is, what the scriptures say, and how it is that we're supposed to live for God and for one another. And in the midst of that, he notices people are just kind of crowded, not just inside, really in his personal space, but also kind of in the doorway, and multiple heads are peeking in. And in the midst of his teaching, those men that came and got their friend were trying to figure out a way to run in through the front door with him. They were probably just holding on to the mat, kind of like a blanket, and made it into like a hammock. And they were all holding a corner of it, and they were using it like a stretcher to bring him to the great physician. And they can't do it. So they said what? Well, buddy, we tried. We're going to go hear what he has to say, and we'll let you know if there's anything good, right? Nope. I don't know how. I don't know how high up, because there are multiple dwelling places in some of these areas in Capernaum. There are different places that might be like an upstairs or a downstairs, whatever it is, whatever challenge there was. Scripture doesn't tell us, because they just overcame it. And they got to the roof. What, so they'd have a good view for when Jesus came out? No, they started digging through it. Most of these houses, it's not like it's a shingled roof with with all the different layers like we have on our homes today. It was very much a clay, kind of a dirt-based thing that would harden in the sun and be watertight. And they were able to chisel through that. I'm not saying it was easy, but they did it. What was it like to be one of the people in the house wondering if something was hitting your hair? You're listening to Jesus, and all of a sudden this grit is just, what is that? What? Oh, I want to hear Jesus. What is that? And it doesn't say, and behold, a great weight fell upon a multitude of people in the living room. It doesn't say Jesus had to resuscitate anybody or set any bones or anything like that. So I don't know what physically happened or what that looked like. That bothers me that detail is not there. But I can imagine it was loud. I can imagine it was a mess. And in the midst of the confusion of wondering what had just happened, all of a sudden, this paralyzed man is lowered down from the ceiling through that hole. And Jesus doesn't look to the man, but he looks to his friends. And he says, your faith has brought healing. The faith of the friends. And he looks to the man and he says, take your mat and walk, right? No, he doesn't say that at first. He says, your sins are forgiven. The man who had laid in the street for so long wondering what he had done wrong, what sin had been committed, whatever, Jesus says, you're forgiven. You are not set outside God's grace. You are within it. You're inside the house of grace. You're literally now inside the house. You're inside the house of grace. And then we start to think about some of these other players, these other characters in the story, right? The scribes of the Pharisees. They're kind of like the reporters to whisper back to the Pharisees, right? And then the other folks that are there that are just followers of Jesus, his regular disciples. And then some of the other people who are locals in Capernaum. And then, of course, the people who own the house. And all this is going on, and Jesus is standing there. And of all the people, the one I think of the most is the house owner going, who's going to repair this roof? No one in Mark's gospel decides that detail is important for us, but I would worry about that. Everybody's like, well, first off, the scribes have this internal monologue, and Jesus demonstrating a very feminine side of his personality. He's got a very masculine side, the whip and the cord and flipping up the money changers tables, right? He's also got a very, very sensitive and beautiful emotional side where he weeps over Jerusalem, but also in this moment when he says, I know what you're thinking. You ever have your mom or your grandma do that to you? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this. And you're like, how did you know that? The spiritual gift. The spiritual gift. And so they're in this moment, and Jesus knows in your hearts, I know what you're thinking, and you're thinking, about this forgiveness of sins and whom I to forgive sins. So you really think that's that big of a deal to have him get up and walk? Well, to prove to you that I have the authority to forgive the sins, I'm just going to tell him to get up and walk. And he does, and the man gets up and leaves. I never understood that, because if I had had that suffering and Jesus had healed me and my friends had done all that for me, I wouldn't want to leave Jesus aside. But you also do what Jesus tells you to do, so you get up and leave, right? Push the pause button on this story for a second. Have you ever wished you had friends like that? You ever wonder what it would take to have the kind of friends that man had that would climb up on a roof, hauling his near lifeless body, digging through a ceiling, a roof, not even worrying about the consequences, and lowering him down so that Jesus can see him face to face? My guess is the best way to have friends like that is to be the kind of friend who would take a friend to Jesus. So as all this is happening, he heals the man, he gets up and walks away. And then Mark just kind of stops and says, that's it. And then Jesus continues on, and he is walking, and he's teaching, and he's doing his thing, and he comes across these tables where the tax collectors are set up. Now, tax collectors, in this case, Levi was not a Roman citizen. They were all Roman citizens, but he was a Jewish person like everybody else around Jesus and in Capernaum and all that. And he says, I want you to follow me. Jesus says this to Levi, also called Matthew. And Matthew just does it. How much trouble do you think Matthew was with the Roman government for just leaving his post? What happened to the money that he'd collected for Rome in the midst of that? I mean, I never thought about that before. Like, he just gets up and he leaves his state-sanctioned Roman post. And he gets up and he follows Jesus. And Jesus pulls a Zacchaeus again, right? Where he sees Zacchaeus up in the tree and he goes, hey, come down. I'm going to have dinner with you. And he sees Matthew and he says, let's go have dinner at your house. And so Levi and then all his tax collecting friends. Why? Because as Jesus is being criticized for eating with these folks, as he is being criticized, it says sinners and tax collectors. Apparently, tax collectors were even worse than sinners. I mean, I guess if someone had to go door to door on April 15th and take our money, that we probably would despise them a whole heck of a lot, wouldn't we? But that face-to-face with that. And I got to thinking about this whole idea with the man kind of leading into this and that notion that we have about our physical healing. I mean, when we think about what's got us upset, either about ourselves or about someone that we love, it's our physical bodies. We think about procedures, we think about pain, we think about diseases, we think about conditions, we think about worries and anxieties that are all developing around our physical selves. But I don't think in 20 plus years of ministry I've ever heard someone during prayer and share stand up and say, you know, I've found myself to be overly judgmental in the last few weeks, and I want prayer that God will soften my heart. I've never heard someone say, you know, I've been a little short-tempered and a little too angry lately, and I think I need to work on that. Would you pray for me? No, we always talk about our headaches. We talk about very serious things, which, yes, Jesus came and he healed people physically. But in this story, we are reminded that there is a greater need for us as human beings, and that is the awareness that there is something more to us than our physical bodies. And we all do that. We all find, and the children's moment was wonderful this morning, gearing us up towards Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and the idea that we have a tendency to ostracize people who are different than us and make them those people. I don't know who those people are for you, but we all have a challenge where we easily, for our own journey, set people aside as those people. The problem is, for us as Christians, as those are the very people, those people of Jesus' day, were the people Jesus then goes and sits and has dinner with. So he's there and he's sitting with the tax collectors and the sinners. And he's challenged again. And he says, you know, I came to heal the sick. The well have no need of a physician. And it's real easy for me to just jump in and say, oh, well, so because it's the sinners, those are the people Jesus is there to heal. But what if he's talking to the scribes and the Pharisees and saying, you know, you don't think you need me, but you do. I'm trying to show you, but you're so caught up in the particulars of your religion that you are not exercising your faith. You're not allowing yourself to grow. You're not allowing your heart to be soft. You're not allowing compassion to help rule who you are in God's kingdom. And so he moves forward in this kind of moment. And then he's challenged again about the fact that the Pharisees are fasting and John the Baptist and his disciples are fasting, and Jesus and his buddies and his followers, his disciples, are eating. Why does somebody fast? I mean, in our own Methodist Wesleyan heritage, John Wesley fasted, I believe, on Wednesdays and Fridays. And he would get up in the morning. He always got up around 5, maybe a little earlier. He would pray, start his day. He wouldn't eat anything until, he was British, so 3 o'clock tea time, right? That's when he would break his fast. And he would use the opportunity of being hungry to remind him how much he desperately needs God. And he would use those as kind of prayerful moments. And if he was in the middle of a meeting or a conversation, of course, he wouldn't just stop and pray, but he would remind himself of how desperately he needed the love of God and the grace provided through Jesus Christ. Jesus talked about fasting. The Hebrew scriptures and the ancient ones tell us about the practice of fasting. But if you were to only listen to some of the fad diets today, you would think that some of these doctors invented fasting. It's like, oh, well, I saw this thing the other day. It said, this doctor, he's the world-renowned expert on fasting. And I'm like, wow, apparently I'm like 2 skip meals away from having a master's then, right? It doesn't sound like it's that complicated. I mean, I know that there's all this nutritional stuff that goes with it. I'm being a little flippant. But my point is the ancients have been practicing this for a very long time. And Jesus' point was a lot of the people that followed him were constantly hungry because they were poor. And so Jesus thought, you know what? They're going to fast when I'm gone, and it's going to be a deeper fast than any kind of situation involving food. Because why do we fast as religious people, as spiritual people? We fast to get closer to God. Well, how much closer to God could you get than spending a meal with Jesus Christ and handing him the bowl to dip the bread in? And he finally uses this analogy of the cloth, but I like the one from the wineskins better. And he says, you don't put new wine into old wineskins because you're going to lose the wine and the wineskin. Because it's going to expand and it's not going to have the integrity to be able to do that, and it's just going to burst. And it was like these new disciples, these new people who were trying to find a way to follow God, and they didn't have all the religious training, and they didn't have all the words and the vocabulary and the education to be like a Pharisee and to get it perfect. And so Jesus, what was he doing? He was teaching them about grace. He was teaching them about compassion and about love and about how, yeah, that stuff is important to take God seriously, but it's even more important to take compassion and love even more seriously. To sit down with people you might not agree with or might not have a lot in common with, and to find that commonality of a shared human experience is to say, I see the God in you and I recognize that, and you are a person of sacred worth. We don't practice that in our society. I mean, we only eat with people we want to have a meal with, either professional or friends or family, and then in our homes it's with our family. Unless we have a guest over or something like that, but that's really about it. So what does this all mean? To wrap it up, it's honestly this whole understanding of what holiness is really about. You know, holiness trying to be more like Jesus today than I was yesterday. It's a real watered-down version of it, but that's kind of what it means. And part of that means that I'm going to take my eternal soul more seriously. It means that the things that hurt my soul, like when I mess up and I'm angry with somebody, and I say words I probably shouldn't have said and I really didn't mean anyway, but I said it in the moment. Or looking at someone who is different than I am, who has a different path than I walk, and I think I know them, you know. I treat them like those people. Jesus teaches me not to do that. He tries to teach me to do that, and I try to learn, but I don't always succeed. How about you? And so that's important for us to remember. Our physical bodies are really important, but so is the part of us, the spark within that is made in the very image of God. There's something sacred about that. There is something that makes that the most important thing, and that is affected by how we treat others. If you don't believe me, remember what Jesus said when he was asked by his critics, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. God, what do I need to do to live faithfully? Love God with everything that you can muster. And love your neighbor. And in that constant relationship, you will find an awareness of how to love yourself. You will find out your own self-worth as you see that reflected in God and in others. You can't do just one part of that and call yourself a faithful Christian because you need it all. It's too hard. You won't be able to do it on your own without neighbor. Obviously, without God. And you definitely can't do it without loving who you are and who God calls you to be, who God created you to be. So the second thing is we practice that by showing love to people who are pushed away. Who in our society is pushed away? Who are the people who are on the fringes of being dehumanized or who are society tells us are less than? Who is it that our culture tells us are to be regarded as those people? How can we show love and compassion? Not just through generosity, that's wonderful. How do we have a face-to-face rehumanizing of not just our own hearts, but also in the other? How do we do that? What's that look like? What would it look like for us to practice that really? What would it look like for us to really take seriously God's reminder that we are made in God's image? What's that look like for you? Who are those people in your midst that God is calling you to step closer to, not farther away from? And finally, be devoted to your religion. Practice your faith, but don't allow it to become an idol. Don't allow the rules of faith to be so overwhelming that you can't be compassionate, that you can't be loving, that you cannot be open to loving other people. What kind of party would you have if you got together all your wineskins and you told everybody how great the party was going to be? And you laid all your wineskins out on a big table and everybody came over like, oh, great. Hey, there's no wine in those wineskins. And you say, I know. Those are the coolest wineskins ever. Aren't those great? What a great party. Like, no, we came to have a party and we figured the party would have wine. Yeah, I know. Wine's great, but wineskins are so much better. What kind of reputation would that first century party have, right? Probably not a very good one. The old wineskin isn't just an analogy of our faith or our spirituality. It's a reminder to us that the content of what's in it is so much more important. And so we need to be willing to adapt. We need to be willing to embrace as the Spirit moves. What are the old wineskins in your life that are ready for an update? What are the things that if new things kind of came around, that it might not have the structural integrity to withstand? Is it a struggle with those people in your life? Is it a struggle with loving yourself? We've all got something different. And if we were honest with ourselves and wrote it down, there would be so many different answers to what it is that we as individuals struggle with. And yet we would probably all understand it with each other in community. So I want to leave you with that image and that question. How are you neglecting the wine? By paying too much attention to the wineskin. In the name of the Sustainer, the Creator, and the Redeemer.